Alcatraz Prison, Hauntings of America's Rock. The wind over the San Francisco Bay has a voice of its own. It whistles through the iron bars, rattles across the crumbling concrete, and carries with it the echoes of men who never left. On a rocky island just over a mile offshore, the infamous prison of Alcatraz sits like a scar on the water, its walls cold, its history darker still. For decades it held the most dangerous criminals in America, men who were meant to vanish from society, locked away where escape was thought impossible. But while the cells are empty now, the island is far from silent. Visitors who come to Alcatraz today often speak of strange sensations. Footsteps in deserted corridors, distant cries that rise and fall on the wind, the sound of metal doors slamming shut when no one is near. In the most chilling cases, people report being shoved, grabbed, or even feeling icy breath against their necks. Some claim to see figures in the shadows, men in prison uniforms from decades past, pacing their cells or staring out from behind rusted bars with hollow eyes. One of the most disturbing legends comes from cell block D, known as the Hole. Prisoners placed in solitary confinement were locked in complete darkness, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. It was here, according to multiple accounts, that one inmate began to scream. He begged for guards to open the door, shouting that something unnatural was in the cell with him, a creature with glowing red eyes. His cries continued through the night, echoing across the cell block, until they abruptly stopped. When the guards finally opened the cell in the morning, they found the prisoner dead. The cause of death was listed as strangulation. His face was frozen in terror, and faint marks as though from hands were found around his neck. Some guards believed another prisoner had somehow reached him. Others whispered it was not a man who had taken his life. Such stories have led many to believe Alcatraz is more than just a relic of history. It is a prison still, but now for the restless dead. But before we uncover more, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more chilling history. To understand the hauntings of Alcatraz, we must first step back into its past. The island was not always a place of concrete walls and barred cells. Before the United States ever built a prison here, Native American tribes avoided the rocky outcrop. They believed it was cursed, a place of evil spirits where the dead lingered too close to the living. When the first Spanish explorers arrived in the 18th century, they named it La Isla de los Alcatraces, the Island of Pelicans, for the seabirds that circled its cliffs. But its reputation was darker than its name. For centuries, the island was shrouded in mist, a forbidding place rising from the waters. In the mid-1800s, as California grew during the gold rush, the island was seized by the U.S. military. A fortress was built, with cannons positioned to guard San Francisco Bay. Soon after, it became a military prison. Here, deserters, mutineers, and those accused of disobedience were confined. The conditions were already harsh. Prisoners were kept in isolation, their days filled with labor and silence. Some were said to lose their minds in the cold stone cells, their cries echoing across the water. But it was in 1934, during the Great Depression, that Alcatraz took its most infamous form. The federal government transformed the island into a maximum security federal penitentiary. Its purpose was simple: to hold the most dangerous, most notorious, and most escape-prone prisoners in the country. The men who arrived here were legends of crime. Al Capone, the Chicago mob boss who had built an empire on bootlegging and murder. George Machine Gun Kelly, a ruthless kidnapper. Robert Stroud, the Birdman of Alcatraz, who spent years in solitary, and many others, bank robbers, gangsters, killers. These were men who had escaped other prisons, men the government wanted forgotten. The prison was built to break them. Cells measured only 5 feet wide and 9 feet long, little more than stone boxes with a steel bed, a toilet, and a sink. The rules were strict: silence in the corridors, absolute obedience, endless monotony. Men were allowed only the bare essentials: food, clothing, shelter. Anything else had to be earned. For many, the silence was worse than chains. Yet even in its early days, whispers of strange events spread among the inmates and guards. Men spoke of sudden cold spots, of shadows that moved where no man stood, of voices whispering their names at night. In cell block D, where the most dangerous or disobedient were confined, these stories multiplied. Prisoners claimed unseen hands tugged at their blankets or brushed across their skin. Some guards admitted they heard footsteps pacing the corridors long after they had been locked and secured. The isolation of Alcatraz was brutal. Surrounded by icy waters and strong currents, escape was considered impossible. Yet the men never stopped dreaming of freedom. Some tried, swimming for the shore, crafting rafts from stolen materials, digging through walls with crude tools. Most were caught or killed. A few vanished into the waters and were never seen again. Whether they drowned or made it to land, no one knows. But the island seemed to hold their ghosts, their desperate struggle echoing across the rocks. And always, in the background, there were the stories of the unnatural. Guards would patrol the corridors and swear they saw men standing in cells that were empty. Visitors reported the sounds of clanging bars and phantom footsteps. Even the island itself seemed to whisper with unseen voices carried by the wind. By the time the prison closed in 1963, Alcatraz was not just infamous for its inmates, but for its aura of despair. The buildings decayed, the paint peeled, but the ghosts, it seemed, remained. Today, tourists walk the cell blocks by day, but by night, when the last boat leaves, the island returns to silence. Or almost silence, for many say it is then that the dead stir once more. And so the question lingers. Was Alcatraz simply a place of suffering, or has it become a prison not for men, but for souls? If Alcatraz was a prison built to strip men of hope, then Cell Block D was its beating, haunted heart. Known among inmates as the Hole, it was the punishment wing for those who defied the rules or posed a threat to the fragile order of prison life. Even hardened criminals whispered about it, and many would later admit they feared the Hole more than they feared death. Cell Block D was cold, damp, and utterly unforgiving. The walls seemed to close in tighter than elsewhere on the island, the windows sealed, the air stale and heavy. Prisoners placed here were cut off from the world. No contact, no sound, no light. The most dreaded of all were the strip cells and the black hole cells. Inmates in the strip cells were kept with no clothing, no mattress, sometimes no light at all. The iron bars shut them away in complete silence. Their food was bread and water, with the occasional meal as a reward. Men left in the dark often emerged, days later broken, muttering to themselves, their eyes wide and fearful of things they had seen, or thought they had seen, in the shadows. One story, passed down by both guards and inmates, chills even the most skeptical visitors. In the 1940s, a prisoner was thrown into a solitary cell for misconduct. That night, his screams pierced the silence of Cell Block D. He shouted that something was in the cell with him, a glowing-eyed figure, not human, but something far worse. He begged to be released, his cries echoing down the corridor. Guards assumed he was hallucinating, driven mad by the darkness. But when morning came, the man was found dead. His body lay twisted on the floor, his face frozen in horror, with strange bruises around his throat, as if invisible hands had strangled him. The death was officially logged as unexplained, but those who worked on the island whispered of a demonic presence that stalked the solitary wing. Even today, guides leading night tours of Alcatraz speak of uneasy feelings in Cell Block D. Visitors step into the cells and immediately feel an icy chill, as if the air itself resists them. Some report sudden dizziness or the sensation of unseen eyes watching from the corners. Cameras malfunction, batteries drain, and strange orbs of light appear in photographs taken here. Paranormal investigators who have set up equipment inside the block often capture unexplained voices, whispers, cries, even words like, "Let me out," or "Stop." Perhaps the most infamous cell of all is Cell 14D, considered by many to be the single most haunted spot on the island. Prisoners confined here complained of cold hands grabbing at them in the dark. One former guard, years after the prison had closed, confessed that even he avoided stepping inside for too long. He described it as standing in a void, where the silence pressed against your chest and the darkness seemed alive. It wasn't only inmates who experienced the strange atmosphere. Guards themselves sometimes admitted to hearing phantom footsteps pacing up and down the corridor at night, even when the block was empty. Others reported the sound of cell doors slamming shut in sequence, one after another, as though unseen prisoners were being locked away for eternity. Beyond cell block D, the hospital ward of Alcatraz carried its own weight of terror. Prisoners sent here were often terminally ill or insane, locked away in rooms where moans and cries echoed through the night. Some of the most violent inmates were chained to their beds, left to waste away. Today, visitors walking through the abandoned hospital claim to hear faint coughing or the dragging of chains across the floor. A few even say they've seen shadowy figures lingering in the corners, dissolving into the dark when approached. The tales are endless. A guard in the 1950s claimed to see the figure of a man in a gray suit walking the hallway, only to vanish as he approached. Tourists have reported sudden bursts of music, harmonica notes drifting from nowhere, perhaps from the days when prisoners found solace in faint tunes. And countless visitors describe being overcome with dread in certain rooms, as if the walls themselves remember every cry, every desperate plea for release. But the hauntings of Alcatraz are not limited to shadows and whispers. Some claim to have seen full-bodied apparitions, ghostly prisoners pacing their cells, or guards standing at their posts long after the prison shut down. One of the most reported is the spirit of Al Capone himself. During his time on the island, Capone's health declined rapidly. Cut off from his empire, his power, and even his sanity, he often played his banjo during recreation periods. Today, many visitors and staff swear they've heard the faint twang of a banjo drifting from the shower room or down the corridors at night, long after the prison has fallen silent. Cell Block D, though, remains the epicenter. Paranormal experts who have studied the prison believe the sheer suffering concentrated within those walls created a kind of psychic scar, an energy so heavy it refuses to fade. The despair, anger, and hopelessness of men trapped in silence may have soaked into the stone itself, replaying endlessly like a broken record. Standing in the hole even now, the imagination runs wild. The darkness presses in, the air is damp and foul, and every sound is amplified. Was it madness that caused prisoners to see creatures with glowing eyes in the shadows? Or is there something on Alcatraz that feeds on despair, lurking still in those solitary cells? While Cell Block D holds much of Alcatraz's terror, the island itself carries a haunted atmosphere that extends far beyond the bars. For those who lived and worked here, Alcatraz was not just a prison, it was a world unto itself. Surrounded by icy waters and relentless currents, it was a fortress of despair, and every escape attempt, every violent act, seemed to leave a lingering mark on its soil. The island had long been considered cursed, even before the prison was built. The native Ohlone people, who inhabited the San Francisco Bay Area centuries before, believed that evil spirits resided on the rocky outcrop. They avoided the island except for banishments, where wrongdoers were sent to confront the restless forces dwelling there. By the time the U.S. military built a fortress and later a prison, the island was already steeped in dread. When Alcatraz became a maximum security federal penitentiary in 1934, it gained a reputation as the place where hope came to die. Escape was thought impossible, yet many tried. Their desperate attempts often ended in death, and with those deaths came ghost stories that would live on long after the last cell door closed. One of the most famous escape attempts occurred in 1946, later called the Battle of Alcatraz. A group of inmates armed with smuggled weapons overpowered guards in a daring bid for freedom. Their plan unraveled quickly, and the confrontation turned into a bloody siege. After 2 days of gunfire, tear gas, and chaos, 2 correctional officers lay dead, and 3 of the prisoners were killed. The carnage left scars not only on the prison walls, but, some say, on the island's spirit itself. In the years that followed, guards reported hearing gunshots and the echo of chaos in the corridors near where the standoff occurred. Tourists visiting the site decades later described sudden chills, the smell of gunpowder lingering in the air, and the faint cries of men shouting orders in the dead of night. Paranormal investigators claim to have captured EVP recordings that sounded like gunfire, screams, and pleas for help echoing from nowhere. But it was not only the major uprisings that etched themselves into the fabric of Alcatraz. Every failed escape attempt seemed to add another restless spirit. Men drowned in the frigid bay, their bodies sometimes never recovered. To this day, visitors standing near the shoreline late at night say they've heard splashing in the water or faint cries carried by the wind. Some describe seeing pale, dripping figures clinging to the rocks before vanishing back into the tide. One chilling legend tells of a guard who was patrolling near the docks in the 1950s when he saw a prisoner struggling in the water, reaching for help. As he ran closer, the figure simply dissolved, leaving only ripples in the bay. He swore he had seen the ghost of a drowned escapee, doomed to replay his final struggle. Perhaps the most enduring mystery is the 1962 escape attempt by Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. Using homemade tools and ingenuity, they dug through their cell walls, fashioned rafts from raincoats, and vanished into the night. Officially, the men were declared drowned, swept away by the brutal currents. Yet some believe they survived. Paranormal accounts add another eerie layer. Visitors on night tours have reported hearing the sound of scraping, as though someone were digging at the walls, or whispers near their old cells that seem to say, "Not yet, almost free." Whether the men escaped or perished, their presence still seems to linger, etched into the very air of Alcatraz. The island hospital, too, remains a chilling center of activity. Beyond treating illness, it was the site where some prisoners lost their grip on sanity entirely. Electroshock therapy, forced sedation, and even lobotomies were rumored to have taken place within its rooms. Visitors exploring the abandoned hospital ward today speak of gurneys moving on their own, faint sobbing echoing from the operating rooms, and figures glimpsed in the shadows that vanish when approached. Paranormal groups have recorded moans, whispered prayers, and even guttural screams from inside the decaying medical wing. Alcatraz was also home to executions, though far fewer than many realize. Most were hangings carried out during its military prison era, long before the federal penitentiary opened. But those who died violently, whether by rope, gunfire, or their own hand, seemed unable to leave the island's rocky shores. Guides recount stories of shadows flickering in the gallows chamber, and some visitors claim to feel sudden tightening sensations around their necks, leaving them gasping for air. One of the eeriest legends is that of Cell 14D's glowing-eyed entity, often blamed for the inmate's mysterious death in the 1940s. But others believe this same presence has been spotted elsewhere on the island, an inhuman figure stalking corridors, radiating malice. Visitors have described feeling a deep sense of dread, followed by sudden scratching or burning sensations on their skin, as though something unseen had marked them. Even animals seemed uneasy on the island. During its active years, prison dogs were known to bark and snarl at empty cells or refuse to enter certain parts of the grounds. Today, birds that roost on Alcatraz will sometimes erupt into sudden, frenzied flight, circling wildly as though disturbed by something invisible moving across the island. Nighttime on Alcatraz is particularly chilling. When the last ferry departs and the island grows silent, the atmosphere changes. Guides who lock up after dark describe hearing footsteps following them, only to turn and find the corridors empty. Doors creak open. The sound of heavy boots echoes in the hall, and the faint jingle of guard keys can be heard, even though no one has carried them for decades. One former ranger admitted that he refused to stay overnight after seeing a shadowy guard standing at his post by the main entrance, unmoving, watching silently before vanishing into the stone. And then there are the stories tied not to prisoners or guards, but to the island itself. The native legends of evil spirits, dismissed for so long, seem more credible when one walks the barren grounds at night. Paranormal researchers argue that the suffering of centuries, banishments, battles, military fortresses, and finally, the infamous prison, layered one upon another, created a convergence of dark energy. It is not only the dead of Alcatraz who haunt the island, but perhaps something far older, something that predates the prison by hundreds of years. When Alcatraz closed its doors as a federal prison in 1963, many believed its dark history would fade with time. The cells fell silent, the gates rusted, and the rock became a relic of the past. Yet the stories of its hauntings only grew stronger. As tourists and park rangers began to walk its abandoned corridors, reports of strange encounters surged, cementing Alcatraz as one of the most haunted sites in America. Modern visitors often arrive with skepticism, expecting only a grim museum. But again and again, they leave with unsettling experiences they cannot explain. It begins with sensations, an icy chill when stepping into solitary cells, the weight of unseen eyes watching from the tiers above, or the overwhelming sense of sadness that seems to cling to the very air. For many, these feelings are so intense that they abandon tours halfway through, unable to bear the oppressive atmosphere. The night tours are the most infamous. Once the sun dips below the horizon, Alcatraz transforms. The shadows deepen, footsteps echo louder, and every creak of the old steel seems to carry intent. Guides recount stories of entire groups falling silent at the same moment, all hearing the distinct clanging of cell doors slamming in unison, though no one had touched them. Visitors standing in the recreation yard sometimes hear laughter, shouts, or the sound of a ball bouncing, as if unseen prisoners were still playing long after death. One of the most chilling encounters comes from tourists exploring the hospital wing. A family claimed to see a man in a hospital gown shuffle across the corridor before vanishing into the wall. Another visitor reported being overcome with nausea and dizziness, collapsing to the floor, only to feel as though unseen hands had pressed down on his chest. When he regained his senses, he swore he heard faint whispers urging him to stay. Paranormal teams who have investigated the hospital often record strange audio, moans, fragments of conversation, and sometimes violent growls that defy explanation. The cell blocks themselves continue to provide terrifying encounters. Many report seeing shadowy figures standing within cells, flickering like candlelight before fading away. Guides speak of doors that refuse to open, only to suddenly swing wide on their own. In cell block C, visitors often hear faint banjo music, a lingering trace of Al Capone, who was known to strum his instrument when his health declined. The eerie notes drift through the air as if the gangster's spirit still clings to the only solace he had behind bars. One ranger recalled locking up for the night when he heard footsteps approaching behind him. Expecting to see another staff member, he turned, only to face the figure of a man in a guard's uniform from decades past. The apparition stood silently, staring, before dissolving into the dark. Another guide described leading a tour when a woman suddenly gasped, pointing to a prisoner standing inside a cell. The figure looked back at her, hollow-eyed, then vanished before the group's eyes. Technology has only added to the eerie evidence. Paranormal investigators bring high-tech equipment to the island, and many claim to capture EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, of men begging for release, shouting orders, or whispering directly into the microphone. Cameras malfunction, batteries drain within minutes, and unexplained figures sometimes appear in photographs. One particularly famous recording captured a deep male voice repeating the words, "Get out." But the hauntings are not confined to the prison walls. The very waters around Alcatraz seem haunted. Late at night, fishermen claim to hear splashing and cries, as if the souls of drowned escapees still struggle against the tides. Some describe pale forms bobbing in the current, only to sink beneath the surface when approached. Rangers patrolling the docks have heard phantom boat engines or seen lantern lights drifting across the waves with no vessel in sight. Even staff who spend years on the island admit to avoiding certain places alone. The laundry room, for instance, is said to be unnervingly active. Inmates once fought and killed each other there, and visitors today often report sudden chills, strange noises, or the feeling of being pushed. The showers, too, carry their own dread. Whispers rising from the drains, the faint sound of water dripping through the pipes have long been dry. Skeptics argue that Alcatraz is simply a powerful place, steeped in tragedy and myth, and that the mind plays tricks in its cold, echoing halls. Yet the sheer volume of accounts, from tourists, rangers, guards, and even hardened investigators, makes dismissal difficult. The Rock has witnessed too much suffering, too much death to remain silent. What makes Alcatraz unique is that its ghosts are not just echoes of the past. They are woven into America's cultural memory. The Rock was meant to break men, to swallow them whole, and in many cases it did. But it seems that not all who entered ever truly left. Their voices linger, their shadows drift, and their despair still seeps through the cracks in the stone. As you stand on the ferry back to San Francisco, the island receding into the fog, you might feel a final chill sweep across your back. The lights of the prison glow faintly, the watchtowers standing like silent sentinels. Perhaps it is only imagination. Or perhaps the Rock is reminding you that it is never truly empty. Because on Alcatraz, the cells may be abandoned, but the dead still keep watch.